Okay, geweldig. So yesterday we were discussing the shaila of let's see where we are. I think we finished this already. Today's Ayin Beis, right? Right, because yesterday we went to Shabbat Gerusha. Okay, I'm sorry. I was a blind ahead. Right. So yesterday we discussed that the Mishnah told us that if she made her original neder when she was in Arusa, no matter how many times she remarried that day, nevertheless, the father still has to come on to the last Baal because of a Avio Bailam Trinidad. However, once a woman leaves her father's Rishus, for instance, she becomes a Boigris, or she becomes an Asua, from there on, only the Baal is made for her Nedarim, and of course, those Nedarim that he's made for have to be Nedarim that are new Nedarim, not Nedarim that were pre-existing. And then we had Shmuel's Chiddush that the Oris Achron is always needed. The Av needs the Oris Achron to be made for any Nedarim, even Nedarim that are near Oris Rishon. And Shmuel said that the source for his Chiddush, or the Chiddush that he learned from his Rebbeim, is in Hoyesiyal Ish, to tell you that the Oris even has a koyach over Nedarim that were from before him, from a previous Baal. The Av will not be able to be made for that on his own. Rather, the Av has to be made for it together with the Baal, which the Gemara brought a raya to from a Machlokes B'Shamai and Basil, where the case that the Gemara brought the raya from was from Shama Baila, the Hoferla. If the first Baal was made for it, the father wasn't aware of this nether until the husband died. So there, for sure, the Av could be made for by himself. But Rav Nosson spoke out that only stems according to Beis Shammai, but according to Beis Hillel, he won't be able to be made for by himself. He needs the Baal. And the Gemara said that the Machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is totally if you say Megas Gaius or Miklish Kalish. So from Beis Hillel, we for sure have a raya, because Beis Hillel says even in this case, the Baal has to be made for, the last Baal has to be made for together with the Av. So you have a raya that any neder that was nearer to the first Baal goes over to the later Baal, and the Av will always need a Baal to be made for. And the Ran spoke out that even according to Beis Shammai, who holds in such a case, the Av could be made for by himself. That's only there because the Baal was made for already. But in Shmuel's case, where the Baal was not made for, even Beis Shammai would agree that the Av still needs the last Baal in order to be made for. And then we got up to this shaila of Gershon. If Gershon is Geshtika Dami or if Gershon is Kakam. On the one hand, Gershon could be Shtika because he didn't make any comment about her nether. But on the other end, it might be Akama. And he's saying, yeah, I don't care about the nether. He's going to keep the nether because I am being Megarashu anyway. Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, it's fine. Perfect. Thank you. And the Nafkamina, the Gemara says, is if he married her again the same day. If it's Kakama, he can't be made for it. But if it's not Kakama, it's like Shtika, then he could still be made for it. So I learned yesterday that there's actually another nafkamina between if he was Makaimit or if it's Kishtika. Because the halacha is, if a husband is Makaim, his wife's nether, she can no longer be shoyal on the nether, because he actually adds an extra level of Isser to the nether by being Mekayim. Unless he's first shoyal on his akama, because we learned he could be shoyal on his akama, then she could be shoyal on her nether. But if he is making it, then she can no longer be shoyal on his afar, on his akama. However, if the akama only came from the fact that he was kishtika, he didn't say anything. So there, even though it's also considered a hakama, and he can no longer be made for anymore, that she would be able to be shoyal on. Okay, so let's see the Gemara now. Toshma. We're looking for a raya. We're going to have several rayas that aren't going to be successful, and then at the end we end up with a good raya. So we're looking for a raya that if it was niskarsha, if he was megarsha woman, is that considered a kiyum or not? So before we get into that, we have to look back at the Mishnah that we learned yesterday, because the Mishnah that we learned yesterday said Nadra v'hi arusa. She made a nether when she was an arusa. Niskarsha by b'yayin, and then he gave her a get. So the halacha is aviu baila mefir nedarel. So you see clearly that that's not the gershon of the Baal. You see clearly is not considered hakama. From this Mishnah, you have a klar raya. Now, if you remember, when we learned this Mishnah, we had a shaila why it said boy b'yoyim, and the Ran told us that there's two options why it could have said boy b'yoyim. Either because the Av heard about the nether, and the Av only has 24 hours to be made for the nether, or it's because the Baal heard the nether, and the Baal only has 24 hours to be made for the nether. And it was Shmuel who learned the Mishnah, Minayin the Aris Achan Mefer Nedarim Shenir Laris Rishon. Shmuel learned that our Mishnah is speaking within the Nedarim Nir Laris Rishon, and therefore the Niskarsha Boy B'Yoyim is because of the Aris Rishon, because otherwise his timing is off. So according to the way Shmuel learns our Mishnah, you have a klar raya that even though it was Niskarsha, it's not considered a kiyum. But if you learn not like Shmuel, and you learn the Boy B'Yoyim is only because of the Av, maybe then this is speaking where it wasn't near La'aris. If it wasn't near La'aris and it was Megarsher, of course that's not considered a kiyum, right? Our only shaila here is if he knows about the nether and he divorced her, is that considered a kiyum? But if he didn't know about the nether and he divorced her, surely that's not considered a kiyum. So the problem that we're going to run into is that the Gemara is clearing this shaila of Gershon is kiyum. According to the way Shmuel learned our Mishnah, Gershon is surely not kiyum, because even though it was Niskarsha Boy B'Yoyim, the future husbands could still be mefer, and we don't say that it was Mekuyim already. So that's one thing we need to point out, and we'll see how that comes out at the end of the Gemara. So Tashma, Ema say Amru Meisabal Nisroikna Rishus La'av. When do you say that if the husband died, the father takes over and the father can be mefer? Zok Taylor Gemara, Bisman Shaloisha Mahabal. Either if the Baal didn't hear about it at all, or he heard about it, but he was made for it, or he didn't say anything, and the clock didn't run out, so that's not considered a kiyum. So in all these cases, the tzara shobash is that the Baal didn't make a kiyum. Frek the Gemara, the Amud Gershon kishtika damu. If you're going to say that Gershon also acts as a shtika, list Ninami Oishama Vigirish. Why didn't the Mishnah list off as another example of when the father takes over after the husband's out of the picture? Why didn't the Mishnah give an example of Shama Vigirish? Midaloi Taniyachi. Since the Mishnah didn't give that as an example of when the Av could be Mefer, Shemamina Gershon Kakamadamu. It must be that Gershon is like Hakama, and the Mishnah couldn't list the case of Gershon, because in fact, if the husband was Megarsher, and then the Av would not be able to be Mefer anymore, because there's already a Hakama. Zok Gemara, that's a very nice diuk from the ratio of this Mishnah. But this Mishnah has a Seifa as well. Ema Seifa. Aval Shama V'Kiyim, Shama V'Shasuk Umeis B'Yom Shalacharav. So if there's a Kiyim because he was Beferish Mekayim, or there was a Kiyim because the clock ran out, then it's considered Mukuyam, and Yochel. Now the father cannot be made for anymore. For the Gemara, I can ask the same diak from the Seifa. The Amud Gershon Kakamadamu. If gershon is considered like a hakama, listening, let it add a case to the seifa of imshama v'girish. If he heard, the Baal heard about it, and he was megarisher, that's also kiyum. So there also the father won't be able to be made for it. So why didn't the Mishnah list that? Since the Mishnah didn't list it, Shemamina Gershon Kishtikadami. The Gershon would not be like Hakama. So now you have a Mishnah where the Reish of the Mishnah has one Mashmoyis, and the Sefer of the Mishnah has another Mashmoyis. This happens often, and the Gemara answers, we can't extract any information about this Mishnah because clearly the Tana wasn't trying to tell us any halacha about Gershon because there's still the Kamashmoyis. And now the Gemara doesn't usually do this, but the Gemara is giving us a little bit of an insight in how this Elamehal Lekal Mashamine. Iresha Dafka Nosef Sefer Misham Resha. It's possible that the part of the Mishnah we're supposed to be midak from is from the Resha, which would then consider Gershon to be a kiyum. So if that's the halacha, so then you'll just say that it didn't mention it in the sefer because of the Resha, and he's sefer dafka. But if the sefer is dafka and you're supposed to be medaik, in fact, that Gershon is not a kiyum, then nasav Resha mishum sefer, then it only has the Resha because of the sefer. What does this mean? It has the Resha because of the sefer. It doesn't have it. So let's see the around here. Zok the hill around. Dafka, the loy matzil mishnah gerushin mishum da kamadami. If the Reisha Dafka and it didn't list off the husband who was Megarsh's wife, why? Because that would have been considered akama, and then the father wouldn't have been able to be maver. Well, the nasiv seifa mishum Reisha, the loy boy lemisna beseifa gavna mida gavna chadda elavuchni legavna the Reisha. The reason why he didn't list it in the Reisha was because we had a diak that it's kakama dami. So if it's kakama, why didn't it list it as an example in the Sefer? Zoktaran, the Gemara is saying, is because we didn't want to list off a case that didn't have a case connected. So we didn't want to list off a case in the Sefer of an example of Mekuyam, if he was Megarsh's wife, because there's no opposite case to balance that off in the Reisha. For instance, if you look at the Mishnah, the way it's structured, it says either Shalosh Shama Baal, so in the Sefer it's Shama Baal, or Shama B'Hafer, and over there it says Shama V'Kiyam. So in each case listed in the ratio, there's like sort of an opposite case in the Sefer. If it would have thrown in the case of Gershon, it wouldn't have had an option for an opposite case. And the Sefer Dafka, the Leimatitana B'Sefer Gershon Mishum the Kishtika Damyan. If the Tana holds its Kishtika Daman, the Nashav Reisha Mishum Sefer, it would have then it didn't list it in the Reisha because of the Sefer. Like boy lemista Bereisha and Lagabni the Matzala Fuchalu B'Sefer. It only wanted to mention something in the Reisha where it can show an opposite case in the Sefer where it would be considered a kiyum. Seems like a very harmless, a very benign round. Breakthrough of Akiva Eger Akasha, not Stam Akasha, of Hashem Yar Ein Akasha. The Zokr of Akiva Eger. Tamu Ali, what do you mean it couldn't have had a balanced case? I'll give you a simple example where it could have used Gershon, where there'd be a Reisha case and a Sefer case. Tamu Ali, inami masti bereisha shama v'shasak v'girsha by b'yoyim. We want the Reisha to have said shama v'shasak v'girsha by b'yoyim, and that would have told us that it's not considered a kiyum, right? The father could be maver. Well, there is a parallel case in the Sefer. Have a matala fucha b'Sefer shama v'shasak v'girsha l'machar v'chamoyde katani b'misa, just like it had with Misa. So I don't understand why it couldn't have used Gershon both in the Reisha and the Sefer, just like it used Misa. One happened that day, which would have been a kiyum. One happened the next day. So this is the highest level of kasha that Akiva Eger has. So I wouldn't dare suggest a teretz because I'm not going to claim to be Hashem's to be the Hashem of Akiva Eger. Okay, but I still wouldn't boast to say that ich verstehe Akiva Eger's kasha. I'm not on that madrig either. But it's a very interesting kasha. We have a perfect case that the Tana could have used Gershon and they would have had a case in the ratio that would balance out the sefer. Tashma. Nodra v'hi arusa. She made a nether while she was an arusa. Vinis karsha, and then she became a goreshes. Vinis arsha boy b'yoyim, and then she got married again. Afilu meya, even 100 times. Avia ubayla ha'achra nafir nederah. That was the Mishnah we learned yesterday. Shemamina, you see quite clearly over here that gerushin geshtikadam, because we're making the assumption that it's the husband who heard. We're making the assumption that the husband heard, and nevertheless he was megarisher, and nevertheless the father could still be mefer with the baila achrin. So you have a klai raya that the gerushin is not a kiyum. The ika kamadamu, if we would consider a gerushin like hakama, mi matzi mefer aris achrin nidri to okum aris rishon. Could the aris achrin be mefer another that the aris rishon was already meklayim? Of course not. So you have a klai raya that gerushin is kishtika. That's why you don't have a raya. We can say the Mishnah speaking with the Aris Rishon didn't hear about it. Not like Shmuel. We have the option to learn the Mishnah not like Shmuel. If the Aris didn't hear about it, so why does the Mishnah have to be a case where this all happened by B'yoyim? If he didn't hear about it, you have more time. And for the Gemara, it's speaking with the Av heard about it. So we're limited to one day because of the father. The boy b'yoyim who dematzi mefer of a mikan ve'elach loy matzi mefer. Because of the father could only be mefer today, but the father cannot be mefer into the future.
And once one of them here, they clock starts ticking.
On that, well, that's on Pashat Pshat is the clock starts ticking on that person. So the Av could only be mefer for a day, but the Baal has unlimited time until he hears about it. Let's see what the if the Ram speaks about this specifically. The Ram does not. But what's important to note is the Rambam holds that the clock ticks for both at the same time. So if the Av heard about it, the clock start ticking for the Baal as well, and vice versa. And the Chorayim struggle to find a makar for the Rambam. There are those who suggest that maybe this Gemara is a riot to the Rambam because it says over here, and it's going on the Baal. Since the father heard about it, now even the Baal has to be made for within that same 24-hour period. But I believe most Rishonim learn that they're independent. Each person has 24 hours from where he heard. And if I've heard about it, it doesn't start the clock ticking for the Baal, and vice versa. Tashma. So we still don't have a right to the Shailam Gerushin. So we'll try again. Tashma. Nadra by B'yoyim. If she made another, and then Girsha v'chsir by B'yoyim. Ein yachal hafer. So now this is speaking about a husband. It's not speaking about an Av. And Shmamina, the Gerushin Kakamadami. You see clearly Gerushin is Kakama, because this is mamish the case. He was Megarisher, and he took her back, and he can't be made for anymore. Vice versa, the Gerushin was like Kakama. So tomorrow, no, you don't have a raya. Here we're speaking about a Nesua. What's the difference? Our Shiloh was by Nesua, just as it was by Nerusa. By the time of Hafer, you know why he cannot be made for if he divorced her and took her back? Mishum the ain't that Baal made for Bekoidin. If he divorced her and then took her back, well, he cannot be made for Bekoidin as in the Nesua. Once he's the only one in charge, since it never came from before. Ain't a Baal made for Bekoidin, so you don't have a raya that it was Mekuya. The Ran is going to explain. It doesn't make a difference if the first marriage was Nesuin and the second marriage was an Arusa. Once she's Nesua, she's out of her father's domain and he can't be made for anymore. And the Arish can't be made for without a father. Or it could be speaking where the second marriage was Nesuin. And even though he could be made for without the Av, he cannot be made for a neder that was there before his Nesuin. Okay, so let's see the Ram, how we paskin, because the Gemara didn't seem to bring a raya to the Shaila, but we did learn that the way Shmuel learned our Mishnah, you have a raya. The way Shmuel learned our Mishnah, it's clear that Gerushin is not Kakama. But our Gemara doesn't come to that conclusion. Since we don't have a conclusion to this Shaila, Nachtin l'chumer, we're going to be machmer the gerishin kakama domi. The gerishin is like hakama, and therefore veicha de nodra. If a woman made a nether, v'shama baila, and her husband heard a nether, the gersha, and divorced her, and then v'hadra b'yoymei, and then took her back, loy matzi mefer la, he could no longer be mefer because l'chumer we say that it was a kiyum. Abul Raj was al kasav. Then he did by yad lo yivshita mehanach mesnaisa the ma'isi Allah. Even though all of these different mishnayos that the Gemara brought just now and could not prove that the hakama, the gershon is like hakama, but we do have a raya of shita law. Remember the Shmuel. We do have a raya from the member of Shmuel. Shmuel said yesterday. How do we know that the Aris Achron is still needed together with the father to be made for Nedarim that the Aris Rishon was aware of? And Shmuel passed it that way. The Alma, you see from here, that Kibla Mirabeh, Shmuel learned from his Rabbeim, the Chitnan de Masnisin Boy Beyoim, when the Mishnah restricts this Hafara to be within the day, is Mishum Shemnias Oris Nokadle. It's because the first Oris had heard about it, and the first Oris had heard about it, and then divorced her. The 24, the Hayoim limitation was not because the father heard. Shmuel heard from his Rebbeim that it's because the Oris heard. That means when the Oris divorced her, he knew about the nether. Yet the later Baal can still be made for. The Chiyun, the Shmuel Amar Hachi, since Shmuel said this, clearly Shmuel Paskins, without a shadow of a doubt, that Gershon is not kakam. So therefore, le'shavkinon my the pshitele l'Shmuel mishemai the istapkaluhu b'gemara. We're not going to reject what Shmuel had as a pashtos to what the Gemara had a suffix. So Zok Rashba, don't go l'chumer like the Ramban because it's not a suffix. Shmuel told us quite clearly that Gershon is not like kakam. Fact the Gemara, if you're so sure about that, if you're so sure about that. We pass on Shmuel. Why didn't the Gemara bring Shmuel? My time remember the Shmuel. Why didn't the Gemara bring on Shmuel? The Gemara knew about Shmuel, but the Gemara is trying to probe to see if you could bring a raya from a Mishnah or from a Brisa. The Gemara wasn't looking for a raya from Ameroyim. The Gemara only wanted to bring a raya from Mishnayos, not necessarily because you can't bring a raya from an Ameroyim. But the Gemara is looking for Mishnayos, and you find this elsewhere, and we actually had it as well. We had a Shaila here in the Nedarim. Hani kahani kohanim that do avoida on behalf of Klal Yisrael. Shlucha didaninu, are they working for us, or shlucha d'shmaya, or are they working for Hashem? And remember, the Shaila was, what if you're mudar enough from kohanim? What if you're not allowed to have enough from kohanim? So if kohanim are doing our work, then he won't be able to bring a carbon for you. But if the Kohanim are doing Hashem's work, then he could bring your carbon because he's not working for you. The law of Shita Hasam, and our Gemara didn't have a raya, even though Avol Gav the Havalei the Mivshiti Mimemer the Rav Hamnuna the Meper Kamet the Kedushin. Rav Hamnuna, who's an Amoira, did conclude this shaila, and our Gemara totally ignores that. Our Gemara attempts to bring different rayas from different Mishnayos, and then our Gemara abandons. Our Gemara doesn't fear us, but we have a raya from Rav Hamnuna. The Shluch of the Shemaya have it. Rav Hamnuna brought a raya to the Shluch of the Shemaya. What was the raya he brought? He says because if they're not Shluch of the Shemaya, where do you ever find something that the Mishalayach cannot do in the action, and the Shlich can do it for you? You cannot learn that the Kohanim are the Shluchim of the Yisrael, because the Yisrael cannot be makar these karbanos. So the Kohanim cannot be our Shluchim. Yet our Gemara totally ignored that. The Gemara earlier in the Darn. Mishum de masnisin, I mean masnisa, have a boy lemivshita. Because the Gemara is just looking for a raya from a Mishnah, from a Brisa, not from a Amoira, not from an Amoira, and the same thing in our Gemara here, even though we have a good raya from Shmuel, that in fact Gershon is not like him, our Gemara didn't quote it because our Gemara was trying to find a Makar in the Mishnah. Such a funny story about this, but it's not a Shlosh L'Hara, so I can't say it. But it's such a good story. Makes it even b'shmak because it's Shlosh L'Hara. But since I can't control myself, I'm going to say it anyway. There was a minhag Chanukah when I was in Yeshiva in Philadelphia that the Bachim would buy presents for their Rebbeim. So the one Rebbe, what did the Bachim decide to buy? They bought him a beautiful set of Svarim that was written by Rabbi Vom Gurvitz. The beautiful says for him on the Yom Tovim. Yeah. They went on one of the staff members. I'm not going to say one of the staff members. The Bochum chipped in, and there's a Gabbai who's in charge of selecting the gifts. Like 1 year we bought Revelia sukkah, a new sukkah. 1 year we bought Revelia an air conditioner. So he says, he never used it. When we used to come to his house for schmoozing, it was boiling hot, so we finally had an air conditioner. But what? He was from the previous generation. They were used to not having air conditioning. I'm sorry? Yeah. Even Reb Moshe Feinstein didn't let them put an air conditioner in his apartment because he was afraid that if I get used to cooling and the air conditioner breaks, I won't be able to learn. So better I shouldn't even touch it. These were the Yidden from Afri the Kedar. We didn't understand it. Anyway, so they bought him this at his farm, and he refused. He refused to take this farm. Now the Bocher who was in charge of the gifts, he used to like cheppering this particular staff member, so he kept on rejecting the gift. And this Bocher was like, I don't want it. We're buying you a gift. Take the gift. He didn't want to take the gift. So finally, the Bocher got frustrated, and the Bocher said, "Listen, we gave it to them. We gave it to the staff member in a box that had stamps on it. If you don't want it, send it back." So the staff member got upset at this guy, and finally the guy said, "I don't understand. What is your problem? Why don't you like the gift that we bought you?" It was like a fight over this gift. So he says, "Because how dare you buy me a sefer from a Heintiker, from a contemporary? I don't need his." So that's what the staff member said. So this Bocher was very brutal on the guy. So he says, "I don't understand what your problem is." He says, "You don't like the sefer. There's people that I know that are much greater than you that love the sefer. For instance," and he picked the name of a different staff member who was maybe, a regular guy. So he got very, very angry. So the Gemara says that we're not going to bring a raya from a Heintiger. We want to bring a raya from a Mishnah, from a Raisa, from a Heintiger. You want us to bring a raya? What's up to give me a sefer from a Heintiger? So now, I learned this Gemara. I appreciate what that staff member said, because the Gemara rejects it as well. The Gemara said, "Don't bring me a raya from a Heintiger. I need a raya from a Friediger, from a Mishnah."
They say more someone who's dead, more
Oh, that was a saga. Okay, Zok to Gemara weiter. Derech Talmidei Chachamim, the minig of Talmidei Chacham would be Ad Shelei Hoisa Bita Yoitzes Me'etzloi, before his daughter would leave his reshus and get married. Omer Law, the father would tell the girl he wanted her to go with a clean slate. So Omer Law, Kol Nedarim Shenadarta B'Soich Beisi. Any Nedarim that you ever made in my household, if I don't know about them, Harehen Muforin, they are Muforin. So basically, this is a blanket afara, sight unseen. Let's see the round. Derech Talmidei Chachamim, L'Vishanayir Hamurasa La'achar Shanisas. Since once Nesuin happens, any Nedarim that are pre-existing, the husband has no Eitzah anymore to be made for. Therefore, Darkan Shal Av Ubal, before the Nesuin, where you needed the Hafara of the father together with the Baal, if they were Talmidei Chachamim, they would be made for all of her Nedarim before the Nesuin. How could you give a blanket afara on an neder that you don't even know exists? But that's what they used to do. Harei and Muforin. Why dafka Talmidei Chachamim? Because they know the halacha. The same thing with the Baal. Before he makes Nesuin, until you come into my reshus, Harei and Muforin, they should be Muforin. Once he makes Nesuin, he can no longer be made for Nedarim from before the Nesuin, and there's no way to get rid of them. The father lost his reshus over her as well, so this is how they made sure she came in without a door. Zok to Gemara, Boi Rami Bar Chama, Baal Mao Sheyofer B'Lo Shemiah. Could a Baal be made for a nether without even having heard a nether? Which is exactly what the Shailins. The Ram explains. Kagon Shalei Shama. He didn't hear about the nether. Can you say, I don't know if you have the Nedarim, if you don't have the Nedarim, but everything's Mufar. Can you do that? Why would I say yes? Why would I say no? Because in the pasuk it says, V'shama isha b'yom shamai. The husband hears the heklish law, then it's going to come in the Nedarim. So there's a requirement of V'shama isha. So is it the Shama isha dafku? When the Torah says V'shama isha, that means he has to hear it in order to be able to make a hafara, or lav dafku. And the Ram says, normally, why would you be made for another? Because you heard about it, you didn't like it. But not that it's an integral component of the hafara. Amar Rabba Tashma, from our Mishnah. Derech Talmid Chachamim, Achalo Yotzes V'Toy Me'etzloi, Omer Lo, Kol Nedarim Shenedarta B'Seich Beisi, Harein before him. V'Haloi Shama, I the father didn't hear. Zok Gemara, L'chi Shama Hu Demefer. It means when he hears, he's going to be made for it. Let's see what this means. Amar Rabba Tashma Derech Talmid Chachamim, V'Haloi Shama Demid Katani, Kol Nedarim. It says all Nedarim. He's being made for all Nedarim. And he's not specifying mashma d'lishamach. Mashma, he didn't hear about any specific nether. Nishmeinu havale lememer nether pliny upliny. If he knew that she made a specific nether, why would he say kol nedarim? He would say the nether that you made about A, B, or C, I'm being made for. And for the Gemara, what it means is lechishamu demever kishayishma achakach nedarim shenadra chayzu mefer ashon. He's making this announcement, but about it that doesn't act as a hafara because he didn't hear them. And when he eventually hears them, when they get flushed out, he will be made from at that time. So what exactly does his proclamation help? It doesn't work. All it helps is hakamash malon urche the tzuvim erbonon ladure. It's the derech of Talmidei Chachamim to try to do whatever they could to eliminate any nether. Let's see what the Ran explains. Im kein ki l'shama lama l'memer mal l'haper ala sofik. Hafar shenem elos. Why should he make hafar ala sofik hafar that doesn't work anyway? Because he didn't hear it. Kivin shesoy v'lachzer l'haper k'sheyishman in the derech. We're saying anyway he has to be made for it once he hears. Zakti Gemara, it's urche the tzuvim rabban. What does that mean? Darko shel Talmid Chacham lechazer Allah. It's the derech of the Talmid Chacham to say this. V'loy malakol nedarim shnedarta harein mufarin. Why? Kidei lachnisa b'dvarim. Once he makes that proclamation, it's going to get her thinking, and she'll respond. Shevitoich kach hinoisenes aliba. Then she'll remember. Oh, you know something, Tati? I remember making some nedarim. Maybe I should tell you about them. So it's a conversation starter. Loimeris nether pliny nedarti, and then boom. So the reason why it makes a proclamation is not because it has a halachic effect, but it jump starts a conversation, and therefore he'll be made for. Why do you need such a doichik to teretz that it's not really a farah and it's only a conversation starter? Why don't you say the following? The Amr Law, he tells her, when I hear it. Kloimar, the Kaidim Shemiya Omer Law, even before he hears the nether, he tells her, move for Lechishmana. I'm making that forward now, that should be chal when I hear it. Umahani. And it should help. The Hakim Taratza L'Kamon, that's how the Gemara explains it later when it's talking about the husband. Yes, Loimer Loidomi. There's a very big difference between the father and the husband. The L'Kamon Kimi Dachin and Hachi, Hanimili Baimer Ishtoy. That's when it's a husband telling his wife. The L'Chishama Nami Birshusei Kaima, Mishamachim Hani. A husband can tell his wife, I'm being made for all your Nedarim now, and it should work when I hear them. That's because when I actually hear them, you're still my wife, and I can be made for your Nedarim. But here, she's about to leave his Rishus. Aval Hocha, the L'Chishama, Fayotus Meshusav, by the time he hears about it, she's already Nesuin, Sharei Nisis. So therefore, it doesn't work to make Afar now that should be Chal when he finds out about it, because when he finds out about it, it's too late. Ki Amar La L'Chishamana, my habit, it doesn't help. So it's a good teretz to say that the husband's hafara works that way, but it's not. You cannot argue that the father works that way because the hafara must occur before the nisu.
You can't give a blank check with it.
Correct. Well, it's not a back then. I could give a blank check, but the problem is there's no money in the account by the time you're ready to cash it. Tashma miseifa. Let's bring a right for the sefer that you don't need shmiyah. So how could the husband say that he didn't hear about the nether yet? So here, there's actually a shayla how to learn this, the Ran's going to say. Because if you notice, here it uses the lotion of l'chish ma'ana, and by the father, it doesn't say l'chish ma'ana. By the father, it says l'chishama. It's a little bit of a different nusach. So l'chish ma'ana might mean differently. So let's look at this Iran, because Iran actually quotes l'chishama by the Baal as well. V'chein Baal hanami l'chishama v'kamashvlon d'urcha l'tzuber abonon l'adure kachi girsa b'mitzvah svarim la girsa hal b'lei peruka kidolil. If you learn the l'chishama by the Baal as well, we're saying the same thing. That the Baal is saying, when I hear it, I'll be mefer again. Why did I bring it up now? For the same reason that the conversation started. But there's other nuschois, which is actually how our Gemara reads, is l'chishama ana, and that's this other pshat that the husband is saying, I'm being made for it now, and it'll be chal when I hear about it. The svir lahu, the nehi, the chihecha, the av, la'achar shmiya, loy motzi meifar, hachanami baal, la'achar shmiya motzi meifar, sheina baal meifar b'koyten. Even though you might compare the two, because the baal can't be made for b'koyten. So when the time comes to make the hafara, the Baal is not qualified to be made for those earlier Nedarim. Afilu hachi, nevertheless, nehi degabe av loy matzina l'trutze. Even though you can't say that by the father, because with l'chish ma'ana at that point she's out of his reshus. Gabe Baal mitartinin hachi. We'll still say that by the Baal. The Omer la koidim shmiya. He'll tell her before shmiya. L'chish ma'ana tachal hachafara. When I hear about those Nedarim that I don't know about yet, this afar that I'm making now should be chal. The bishlema avle motzi avarachi. The father can't do it. Mishum de benesua nafkale meshusha lagamri. Once she's nesua, I'm sorry. No, I didn't. Nafkale meshusha lagamri. Aval baal adarabba. Benesuan aylei reshusay. Through nesuan she becomes more in his reshus. Umay time amrina and deina baal mefer bekoidman. Why did you say? Why is there halacha that the Baal can't be made for a bekadmin? Because you need a father. Aval hacha, even the av hoper chelkoi kodim shenisses. Since in this case the father already took care of his part. Ubal nami tzirfa lafar today by the afar the Baal, b'afar the av, and the Baal already made his afar too. He said l'chish ma'ana kodim shenisses before the nesuin. Therefore, nehid chichayla lafar the Baal is stalak le'av. Even though when the afar the Baal will actually be chal, it's already after the father was gone, because he only heard about the nether after Nesuin. Afilu achimefer, it still works. So that's the chiddush of the Ran, that according to the Giz of l'chish ma'ana, maybe that hafara of the Baal will work. V'avshanami d'chishama mishash hafarla hu d'chayla hafara delay v'ket tzrufa ma'alya dehadi da'av ba'de Baal. Now the Ran wants to say even it's possible to even l'mafreya. Zen near li l'farish l'figure suzu. Okay, so that's another deflection, so we don't have a raya about Shmiel here. Tashma, let's try another raya. Someone tells his wife, any nether that you make, so he's married to this woman and he's traveling. He says, any nedarim you make between now and when I get back from my vacation or from my business trip, Haray and Kayomin, they should be Mekuya. What if he said Haray and Mufarin? What if he said they're Mufar? Rabbi Eliezer Mufar, it is Mufar. Frank the Gemara, if you need Shmiya, Volo Shama, you didn't hear. Dr. Gemara, Hachanami, Damar L'chish Ma'ana. Once again, you'll say the same thing as we said earlier. They'll say L'chish Ma'ana. Correct Gemara, V'lamali. Why should he do that? Min hashta, V'lamali, min hashta L'chishama Leifrala. Why does he need min hashta? Why does he have to make this hafara before? Let him make the hafara when he hears about it. Why does he have to do this weird transaction? The Sabbath Gemara, I might be torrid when I hear it, and I won't be made for it. So to be sure, I'm being made for it now. So once again, you don't have a raya that you need shmiyah.
Why does Asura yeah work and not now?
The Gemara is going to discuss that. Tashma, so if someone told an apotropos, so he was going away and he hired an apotropos to take care of his wife's affairs. And he said, "Kol nedarim shenederes ishti mikan v'yad she'avim imakim plani." Any nedarim that my wife will make from when I leave to when I get back, hafer you should be made for. And he did his job of a hafer law, and he was made for it for him. Yachol you mufarin, you might think that the nether will be mufarin, and the apotropos does what he's supposed to do. Talmud Loimer, the pasuk says, "B'davke isha yikipenu." Isha yikipenu. There's a gzeres hakosov that says an apotropos cannot make hafar. Divrei Rabbi Yishai. Divrei Rebbe, Divrei Rabbi Yoshia. Amalei Rabbi Yoshia. Rabbi Yoshia said, "I don't understand." Matzinu b'chala Torah kula shlucha shalom k'maisa. You find b'chala Torah kula shlucha shalom k'maisa. V'afilu Rabbi Yosy aloi kamar elam shum gzeis hakasavu, because isha yikimenu v'isha yiferenu. Aval duchula alma shluch shalom kamoisa. So you're telling me as if it wasn't for the fact that you had a pasuk to tell me that the fire wasn't good, it would have been good. Why do I need a pasuk to tell me that this doesn't work? On the pasuk, if you hold that you need to hear about it, the Baal didn't hear about it. So, in fact, Gemara, you have a raya once again that you don't need to hear about it. You have a raya that you don't need to hear about it, and that's why there's a haba meaning that it should be a good hafara, and that's why you need the pasuk to tell you that it's not. He said that when you hear about it in Mefer, so why should he do that? Let him just be Mefer when he hears. But tomorrow, he's afraid he won't have time to. We're going to go back to this tomorrow because this opens up a huge new sugya of shlichus and apotropos. So we do have to go over this again. So we'll review this message tomorrow.
Actually, this is the reason. Weil hat nicht gehört, von dem können, weil der Eibste will so hören.
So now you're being Gashin in time of the crow.